Welcome back. So in this video, we're going to learn how we can use Docker to host our own program in a container. Now, if you would like to know more about why Docker, what exactly is Docker, or how can I be started using Docker, then I'll link a description down below where you can read more about exactly what is Docker about and then why you should be learning Docker, which is quite important. If you want to have a head start in the field of computing, software development, as a developer, you should be knowing some how to use Docker. Now, if you're okay with this, then let's jump right into the command prompt and I'll show you how exactly we can start up a web server by using one line of command in Docker, and you will also see that you can actually browse the web server that you have just started in your local machines. So let's get right into it. Probably also need to have the Docker running on the machines so that we can do this together. You can type along while I'm showing you the commands. That will be the easier way for you to learn. Otherwise, it will be just like you're watching the K-drama without the subtitles. Okay, so anyway, it is up to you. Let's jump right into it. Okay guys, now we are in our CLI here, and I'm going to show you how we can start up an nginx web server using just one line of Docker command. Okay, now if you're running on Windows or maybe some other operating system, then you can use any tool that you like. Now if you're running on Windows, you can be using a PowerShell or even command prompt will work. And if you're on Linux, then any terminal or any shell will work as well. Now, just something to note here, if you are running on Windows 10 Home editions, other than the Pro editions, then you might need to run this directly from the command prompt inside the Docker toolbox that you have already installed on the local machines. Okay, now if you're ready, then let's get practical. Now, the first thing that I would like to show you is how can we use a Docker command to check on our Docker versions. So just to be sure that everything is up and running properly, you should see something like this. And over here, it is showing you that the client, the Docker client and the Docker server that is currently running on the machines. Now, some of the time you might get some different versions where you have an older client to a newer server, or it could be the other way around, but that is actually okay. Except that you don't want to have a version which is too far apart. For example, you have a version 10 to a version client to a version 19 server, that you could be having some compatibility issues. Now anyways, coming back to our example here, so how can we start up a web server using a Docker? Now before I show you any command, I just want to give you some brief idea that what we are exactly trying to achieve here. Now, you see, for us to start up a web server, there are many ways we can do this. Okay, you can have an APB server running, or you can just spin up a server on AWS itself, which is the most convenient way if you ask me. But it is going to cost you a bit of money if you have a lot of traffic which is going into your server. Okay, now over here, we're going to use the nginx image from the Docker Hub. So nginx is you can use nginx to start a web server, or you can use it for some other things like reverse proxy, things like that. Anyway, this image is already hosted on the Docker Hub, and when we are running this command later, if this is the first time you are using Docker, that image is still not in your machines. So what Docker will do is it will be checking on the local host, and if it doesn't find the nginx that it needed to start the web server, then it will be pulling that image from Docker Hub itself, which is quite convenient because you can just do this by typing a few commands. Okay, now for us to start it off, we're going to use the Docker command here as usual, and because now we are running container, so we will be using the container command like what we have talked about in the earlier video, and we will be using the run command, which is to start a container. Okay, now we have talked a little bit about the parameters that come after this command, so that you get this right. Okay, now before I go into this, you should know that running different container might require different kind of arguments. Okay, now depending on what you're going to run, for you to find out what kind of arguments that you need, you can actually go to Docker Hub, click on the image that you want to use and read on the description. It should be very clearly documented that for you to run this, what kind of arguments that you should be putting into the terminal for it to be run properly. Okay, now as for the nginx, the first thing you should always put in would be the port numbers, because this is a web server, so it is very important for the machines to be able to know that what is a port that is currently listening for me to reach that web server. Okay, now in Docker we use the -p options for us to specify the ports, and there are two parts to this parameter. Okay, now on the left hand side is where we specify the port we want the container to be listening on. So for example, I will put this as a port 80 because since this is a web server, if probably possible, I would like it to be running on the default port 80, which is reserved for web services. Okay. Now, if you have an error later on when you're running this command, one of the reasons could be that your port 80 has been used up by some other programs that is running on port 80. Now, in that case, what you will do is you change this number from 80 to some other random numbers, depending on whichever number which hasn't been taken up. Okay. Now, as for my case, I know that port 80 is free, so I'm going to use port 80, and followed by another 80 here, which is the port 80 on the local host. So you see now over here, we have a container, and your container is running on the host which is the machines that you are currently using the Docker on. Now the first parameter here is the port 80 on the container, whereas the second parameter is the port 80 on the local machines. So what does this mean is that if you have traffic coming into the port 80 on the local machines, your local machine which could be a laptop, your desktop, they will take this traffic or this request and forward it to the port 80 on the container, which means that whatever container that is running port 80, then this is for you. Okay. Now coming back to the CLI here, we have already specified from container port 80 and listening port 80 on the host. The next thing we want to do is we want to put in a -d options. Now this D here stands for detach. Now depending on what you do, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to put this in. Most of the time we would be using a detach when you run a web server, so that the web server could be running in the background mode. Now what it means is that if you have a -d options, by the time you run the command to start up the web server, then once the server has been spin up, you will get the control back on the terminal, meaning that you can continue to type any commands, continue to with the development work, things like that on the terminal. Now without the -d options, once the server is running, then you wouldn't be able to do anything else on the command prompt or the terminal, depending on what you're using. So in that case, you might have to start up another CLI tool for you to continue your developments. So most of the time, if it is a web server, then you would want the -d options with it. Okay. Now, of course, you are free to experiment to see how does it look like with a D and without a D options. But anyway, to make it simple, normally we want it that. Okay. Now the next thing the next parameter here would be a name options. Now, for us to specify name on the Docker, we use a --name followed by the name of we want to name the container. Okay. Now since this is a web server, I'm going to name this let's call this spiderweb. Why not, right? This is a web server, so spiderweb sounds cool to me. And that is how I name the container. So if I have these options, once I hit enter and run, a container with the name of spiderweb would be running, and it is listening on port 80 as I have specified on the -p 8080 options. Okay. Now if you don't have these options, then Docker would by default assign a random name to your container. Definitely it will have a name, but it will be a name that you couldn't even recognize, or maybe you couldn't even pronounce it. Okay. Now it is not really modern here, but the point is that most of the time you want to name your container, because let's say in a real live productions environment, you would have a long list of containers that are running. You have more than one container, I'm sure about that. And you want to have a proper naming convention so that you know exactly what container is doing what for you. Okay. Now another thing would be, it will be easier for us to access the container if we have a name. Now for example, if you don't have a name, and by the time you want to remove the container, or you want to stop the container, or say you want to get into the container, then you have to do it by the container ID, which is a long line of numbers, and I don't think it's a very easy way for us to go with the ID, right? Because we are human cannot remember numbers well unless you're some kind of wonder kids, then that's another story. But for me, it will be easy if I call the container by the name. Okay, so let's explain why we need to name our container. Okay, now going back to the command here, the next thing we will put in would be the container name. Now again, like I said earlier, we are going to use nginx. So I'm going to just use the image name nginx here. Now a quick tips for you here, if you would like to run this using different versions, say you want to use a 1.6 versions, then this is how you name it. Okay, now if you want to use the latest version, then this is how you name it. Now if you don't put in anything here, then by default this Docker is going to go to the Docker Hub, and they will pull the the latest image from the hub that they can find, and it will be running on your local machine. Okay, which is cool because most of the time you would want to have the latest one, other than if you have some compatibility issues that you might have to roll back to some older versions. Okay, now seems that all the parameters here is in place. Now if you press enter, it should be running the container. So let's press enter here. Cool, that's it. Our web server is up and running right now. So as you can see on the screen here, what you have here is the container ID that I'm talking about, which is the long line of number, which means that once you start any container, you get an ID. And if you want to see what are the running container, then we can use the Docker container ls-a options, and this will show you all the containers that is currently running. I'm going to resize this window to make sure you can see this easier. Okay, now here we go. So over here you can see that I actually have 5 containers that are currently running on my local machines here. So this is the one that we have just started, 34AA990, which is exactly the number that you can see here. Okay, which means that our server is up, and again the server name spiderweb is already running, which is listening on port 80, and the traffic will be forwarded to the port 80, and now it is already running for 26 seconds, which means that I've been talking for quite some time now. Okay, now the idea here is that I want to show you exactly how you know what container is running, because in the real world you might be running so many containers, and you want to see like if this container is up or if that container is not running. Then the right way again would be to check on your container by using ls-a. It will show you all the running containers. Okay, now what about if I want to know a little bit more about this container? Okay, now for example, if I want to know about the detailed information, then we're using Docker container inspect. This inspect option is going to tell us more about this container, followed by the container name spiderweb. Now if you press enter, you will see depending on whether you have some experience with this kind of commands. If you don't, it is okay. We're going to get into more of them in details in some later video. As for now, maybe we can try to look up for some important informations like, okay, over here you see that it is telling us it is running on port 80, which is exactly what we want because this is a web server. And then you might also notice that they have an IP address. Hey, why do have a container have an IP address? So if you are familiar with computer networking, you know that for every machine to go online, you should have a public IP. Now you only need a private IP if you just want to talk in your own local area network. Now what about this? What is going on here? Okay, now the idea for the IP address for container is that says we have many containers. In some cases, we would like to have this container talking to each other. Now in those cases, the way a container is going to recognize what container is doing what container ID is that, and how do I talk to container of interest, they'll be using IP address as well. Which is why here you see that every time you start a container, Docker automatically assign a private IP address starting from this 172.17.0.0 network here. You will be starting to give out IP address for every new container that you are running, which is why the first one here is reserved for the gateway, which is kind of the router in your local area network. So over here, the idea is that if you would like to containers to talk, then of course you will need some kind of addressing, and Docker is actually using a private IP addressing to identify containers. Now we're going to talk more about this when we go to a video on how we create networking for containers so that we can link some of the containers together. Okay, now press Ctrl C. This will bring you right back to the command prompt here, the console, and let's try to see how much resources that this container is actually eating up. So we can do a container states followed by your container name, and press enter. It is going to show you exactly how much resources it is eating up. Now of course, what you can see here is this is a simple web server, and since there's nobody doing requests right now, you can see the CPU idle, memory is like 0.09%, which is quite very lightweight at the moment. Now if you go to productions, of course this is going to be quite different because you have so many containers running, and if you got a lot of hits on your web server, then these resources is going to go out really quick, which is why in some later video we are going to learn how we can scale your web server using Docker. Specifically, how can we use Swarm or Kubernetes to orchestrate all kind of scalability issues that we might have when your web server is getting more and more popular. Okay, now do a Ctrl C, get back to your CLI, and the next thing you want to try would be can we really access this web server that we are running? So I'm going to switch to a web browser to show you that our nginx server is already running here. So over here, let's try to check whether this is working, right? Okay, so I have, now let's go to the web browser here, and then you can put in localhost -80, which is the port that we have put in earlier. Now there you go, you see that the web server is telling us, this website is telling us that your web server is already up and it is reachable. And what you can do here, it is totally up to you. You can put in your own custom websites, you can change out the layout, things like that. If you are familiar with website designs, things like that, then this is a place to shine. Okay, now we are not going to go deep into what kind of customization we can do, because we are just going to learn how we can use Docker to run a simple web server like an nginx server. Okay, now if this is clear, then let's go back to the command prompt here, and then the next thing we want to do would be to stop this container. Now says that I am done with the container here. I don't need this container anymore. So -a here. Okay, so the way we can stop this is using Docker container stop. The command is stop, followed by the container name that you want to stop. Of course, you can use the ID here, 3488. This will work. You just need to type the number until they are unique enough. So for example, in this case, I can just type 34, and Docker will know that we want to stop the nginx container. Okay, because go here now, you can see that we have two containers starting with 3. So if I just do a stop 3, then probably this is not unique enough for the Docker to tell whether do you want to stop this or this. Okay, now if you do a 3-4, then Docker would have no problem knowing that this is the one that we are referring to at the moment. Now anyway, I'm just going to use my name, since I have a name here, and I press stop, and here you go. You do a Docker container ls-a to check whether the container is still running. Now as you can see here, the container is still here. It is still alive in the machines, but it is not running at the moment. Okay, which is something that you want to do before you remove a container. Okay, now how do you restart a container? Say that you have to go in and spin up a web server, and by the end of the day you want to shut it down before you leave, then this is going to be very useful, right? So the next day when you get back to work, do a Docker container start followed by the container name that you have already created earlier. Now let's check whether the container is running. Docker container ls-a. See now the same container that we have created yesterday is spin up again to be used today, which means that we don't really have to recreate containers for every kind of single purpose use, and this is the right way to do it, because in some of the cases you might have some custom data that come with the container. So just a quick tip here, container actually store this as a UFS layer. We're going to talk more about that in some other videos, but as for now, this is the right way to do it. Okay, now how about if you want to remove the container completely? To remove the container, we're going to use docker container rm followed by the container name. Now if you press enter, most likely you're going to get an error here, because Docker knows that this container is still running. So as a safety precautions, Docker is not going to let us just remove a container which is still running at the moment. So over here we have two options. Now one way would be you have to manually stop the container first. So you have to say stop spiderware, and once this is stopped, then you can do the remove. Okay, now I'm going to show you a faster way is we will use the -f options, which stand for force remove, and then followed by spiderware. Now if we do this, Docker is going to stop the container before removing it. Now let's do a ls to see whether it is still here. So docker container ls-a. Now you can see that the container that we have just created earlier with the ID 34AA is no longer here. So that shows us how you start a container, how do you stop it, how do you restart the container, and how do you remove it if you are done with the container. So that's it for this video. I hope you have learned a bit of the basics of Docker and how do you start up a container. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how you can exactly get into the container itself to do some programming or any administrative stuff that you would like to do on the container. So that's it for this video. Thank you for listening and happy learning.
So electric dance what I saw, and even if I wanted to, I can't stop. Yeah.